Now let me introduce Skippy Hau is an aquatic biologist with the Department of Aquatic Resources, Department of Land and Natural Resources here in the state of Hawaii. He has been doing this for 36 years. So we're really lucky to be able to hear some of his stories, have him share his knowledge with us. And thank you, Skippy. I'll hand it on over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hi, well, thank you for inviting me, and as well as I was able to go and look up some old, look at my old information that I got from way back. So I kind of wanted to focus on some of the invasive species that we've kind of encountered in the streams, in the canals, in the irrigation ditches, and I'll share some stories. I'll share some of the stories that I've kind of come across. So in this first picture, this is a picture, if you can see the orange, that's what we call red devils. This is at Kealia Pond. So it has a mix of species, not just tilapia, but also top minnows. We have also mosquito fish there in the pond. So like I said, I'm going to be introducing invasive species. Okay. So what I did was I looked up an article, and in this article, this is a 1941 article. This is a game warden, and game warden Anderson. Basically, he's showing 3 oysters, and this is, I guess, it was planted back in 1937 and 1941. This is in the Maui News, and what they wanted to do was to let people know that the oysters were not in season. They planted this way back in 1937. And so this photograph on the Maui News was 1941, that they had wanted to talk about the oysters that they planted by Pier 2 in Kahului Harbor. This is another article, 1926. What was interesting is they were talking about fish propagation. And then, so what happened was there was a warden, Montgomery, planted a few thousand rainbow trout eggs in the stream in Keanai. So what they were doing was actually kind of bragging. They said that the trout was up to about 18 inches in length. And then they were also introduced trout to Hawaii and Kauai. And 1-year-old Maui trout measured 14 inches, and the other islands being slightly smaller. In June of that year, roll from Wyoming trout were planted in Ohia Springs, New Keanai. Little bit more recent times. I wanted to go into aquatic resources. So these are some of, well, we're going to some of the snails. So what I've shown is, let me see. So this, what we call, used to be called the Taro patch snail. This is the Chinese taro patch snail, and that was introduced into the taro patches a long time ago. But this snail does not eat the taro. And so in some places they're still around, and but they don't eat the taro. These other snails on the top right, there's what we call a tiara-day, kind of pointed. And actually on this bottom left, if you look here, there's actually a hihiwai. It's a hihiwai recruit. Actually, they're migrating upstream. This was taken in Wailuku stream. They're migrating upstream. And this other snail here on the right bottom is called a pouch snail. It's well, in the family Physidae. But at times you'll see them in season, and even in the EMI irrigation ditches, you see sometimes these, it's like a clear mass. What they'll do is they'll lay eggs, but you see them in the thousands at times. So it kind of depends on the season. The other thing I wanted to introduce is that we had people, this is back in the 1980s. This is Pomacia canaliculata. So this is an apple snail. So this apple snail was introduced to folks who thought that they'd be able to make some money in the taro patches. But when they introduced the apple snails, and like in other places, in the southeast, they introduced it to rice paddies. The snails started eating the crop that was in the patches. If you see the pink eggs, if you look at this taro, the pink eggs are laid on this snail. And the apple snails, in actuality, I got a report from Kahului, the wastewater treatment plant. The snails had gotten also into the wastewater treatment plant and were laying these pink snail egg cases along the sides of the tanks. We also had freshwater clams that were introduced to the islands. Originally, this is in the late 1980s. They were introduced to Oahu and Kauai. And then in 1988, it was introduced to Hawaii Commercial and Sugar in the reservoirs. So we found some of these clams. These are freshwater clams. They're also called Asiatic clams, but they were introduced into the reservoirs and people like to eat them. So this was back in 1988, but previous to that, they were reported on Kauai and Oahu. Another introduction is also, we have, but this is a reptile. These are pet turtles. So sometimes they get out, the turtles get out and then they'll get loose. What's interesting is we found them in Honomanu stream, but I had a turtle one time, someone called me. This is a storm in Kihei. And what happened, if you look where the area right where the humpback whale sanctuary is, there's a crosswalk. Somebody had gone there, and then what happened was this turtle had crossed in the crosswalk, and they called, and then I picked up that turtle. Was an adult. These are what we call red ear sliders. People, a lot of times, they get it from the pet store, and then it gets loose. The other thing I'd like to also introduce is we've had also Tahitian prawns. This is what we call Macrobrachium lar. These prawns, way back, Fish and Game had introduced them to Molokai and Oahu. This is about 1956, and they now are spread around throughout the whole state. The reason I show these other pictures, if you look, this is a juvenile, but if you look at the claws, you see on the, basically on the claws, you see this kind of like yellow cufflinks. That's how you can identify the Tahitian prawns. And also this big one with the blue pinchers, this is a male. It's what we call a terminal growth male. So when the males are real big, then what happens is all the energy actually goes into their claws. They won't get any bigger than that. The other prawn that we have, and I wanted to also show the native, so in case you see the different ones, this is the native prawn. So again, look at the claws. You see these stripes or bands on the claws. That's what they look like when they're small. But also when they're big, what happens is that one of the claws is like a fiddler crab. So one claw is bigger than the other. This is an adult here, and actually there's a juvenile up here. But if you see those, this is the native prawn. The native prawn is called Opai Oeha'a. This is another introduction. What happened was Patrick Doleman. He was a Maui high school student at the time. This is back in 2002. And what he did was he had gone to go and collect hihiwai, as well as he had his tree prong. He was spearing prawns. He saw this eel in the stream in the backside. And what he did was he speared this eel. This eel is about 8 pounds. I had to tell him, I said, I don't know what kind of eel this is. And then I sent it to Bishop Museum. And so this was identified by Bishop Museum. And at the time, what they did was they took a sample and then they ran genetics on it. So this eel actually was genetically identified. And then so this one was, like I said, identified through genetics. And this is also, it's called anguilla, but the Japanese name is unagi. Unagi is also what they use to make in sushi. So this is the eel. They also use that to also put on barbecues and things. But the ichthyology department at Bishop Museum was telling me that in the 1920s and 1930s, that this eel was raised in backyard ponds. So don't forget, we didn't have supermarkets. So people used to raise them and then they'd eat them. These are some other fishes that we see in the streams. A lot of times we have different types of top minnows. Above we have this green and orange swordtails. as well as then on the right top is guppies. Uh, these guppies, the male guppies, will have all these different vibrant colors. On the bottom were top minnows, and then on the right bottom is also armored catfish. We had some armored catfish that were introduced, and actually they had been established for a little bit in Kanaha Pond, as well as the canals right behind where Kahului Safeway is. And those were some of the introductions. They no longer are there, but they used to be. This is going back to Kealia Pond again. So this is mosquito fish, what we call Gambusia affinis. So a lot of times what people would do is they introduce the mosquito fish, and through that, people have introduced mosquito fish to try to control mosquitoes, but they get established. So in this is, like I said, was in Kealia Pond. This is what they look like in the pond, and this is what they look like close up. So in the streams also, we have different amphibians or frogs and toads. So a lot of times if you see these black tadpoles, the small tiny ones, this is in Wailuku stream, but this is the cane toad tadpoles. So they'll be small and they'll be black. And then later on they develop with first establishing legs and then losing their tails, and then small little toads. The top right is this one is a tadpole for a frog. And then this bottom right is a wrinkled frog. This is what we see upcountry. And so some of the upcountry streams, you see a frog and then they kind of have this kind of wrinkly skin, but it's called a wrinkled frog. And these were introduced and they became established upcountry inside the streams. I show this because this is in Wainapanapa Caves. What I was doing was because someone had introduced guppies into the caves. We also have what we call opai ula. These are tiny shrimp that are established, or actually they're in a way in the back and actually in the dark. What happens is that at night, the shrimp will also come out to the dark, out into the sunlight, but the guppies and the actually mosquito fish will feed on the red shrimp. So I used to go in, I know I'm not going to eradicate them, but I use top minnow traps and use bread for bait, and then basically try to remove or reduce the population of guppies inside Wainapanapa caves. I wanted to show Kealia Pond. This is Kealia at the mouth when it's open. And so when it's open, not only do the fishes in the pond go out to the ocean, but it's fishes that are in the ocean will also come back, and then they'll come into the pond. And that's kind of like what I wanted to show you this last story. Kealia Pond last year, we had kind of drought conditions. So the pond actually was evaporating and the water level was going down. So in Kealia Pond, we have tilapia. The family is called Cichlidae, or let me see, tilapia. And we also have what we call red devils, this kind of orange fish that we see in Kealia Pond. This is actually what they look like in Kealia Pond. You see the tilapia here and the red devil here. I have a story. This is from August. Back in August, what happened was we had Kona weather. And anytime we have Kona weather, what happens is that sometimes we have an algae bloom. When you have that algae bloom, the oxygen in the water basically disappears or is very low. And so the bigger fishes will die. These were papio reported at Kealia Mouth. This is on August 7th. So I kind of just wanted to show what happened. So these bigger fish died. And then also some of the tilapia here. And then there was a red devil here. And then this is light. It's also, you find that in the ocean, but this was in the pond, but it died also. So we had a total of actually 41 papio that died. So average size was about 16.6 inches fork length, and the largest was about 20.9 inches. Just from their size, we can identify or estimate that the fishes were between 2 and 3 years old. But see, what happened was all these big fishes actually not having enough oxygen, they died in the pond, and then they washed ashore. And so that's what we had from Kelia. So that was just last year. I guess my reminder, and just please do not release animals to the aquatic habitats. Pay attention to the wet and dry conditions. And clean drinking water continues to be our most precious resource. That ends my presentation. If you have any questions.
Hi, Skippy. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth. Thanks for your talk, Skippy. That's awesome. Glad to hear about you doing such great work. So like Skippy said, if you guys have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat, or you guys can put them in the Q&A box as well. We saw a few people join a little bit late, so I'm just going to relaunch the polling while we wait for some questions to come in. So if you guys, I don't know if, yeah, I think people that voted are going to have to re-vote, but if everyone can just do us a favor and retype in their answers so that we have a more wholesome look at the attendance, that would be great.
Jen, I saw a question come in on the chat. Do you mind if I go on and share that with Skippy while we're doing the poll?
Yeah,
so there was a question, do you have any comments on the impacts of the invasive shrimp and fish in the streams?
Oh, actually, no, I've kind of learned to live with it. In a lot of times when things get introduced, it's really hard and difficult to eradicate things once they become established. One of the things that we notice is that the reproduction. So even when I showed that, oh, am I still on shared screen? Can I?
Yeah.
I'll show you this video if I can just sneak it in. Okay. Okay, that is Wailuku stream. So Wailuku stream, at times, then you have guppies and swordtails, and these fishes keep getting introduced back into the streams. So for Maui, because we have the East Maui irrigation ditches, what happens is that these fishes get to repopulate the streams. So it's not that we're going to see this all the time, but what happens is when we have big storms, the fishes will get washed out of the streams. And I don't think we'll be able to get rid of them, but again, just to be aware that they're present, and then you'll be able to see them. What was interesting is one time I even saw in Waikamoi stream, I found a carp, and this was upstream. And I think that was from way back when we were doing, just inspecting the streams, we had seen a carp. This is the carp. It's not the colorful orange type, it was kind of regular. It was a carp that was in the stream still yet. So things like that we see in the streams. As to the introduction of prawns, the Tahitian prawn, like I said, was introduced by Fish and Game. That was the same time in the 1950s. Fish and Game had introduced the ta'ape, to'au, and the roi on the marine side. And they thought we didn't have enough snappers. And again, at the time, they thought that they could at least introduce things that people could harvest and eat here. And then so those were introduced way back then. And then I don't expect the Tahitian prawns to say disappear. They're present, but like I said, you can tell the difference now. So hopefully the two different prawns. The Opai Oeha'a, what's interesting is that when they restored the flow-in Wailuku stream, Opai Oeha'a started migrating upstream. I monitored for 15 years before they released the water, and Opai Oeha'a wouldn't come upstream. And then they kind of sensed that the continuous flow of water in the stream, the Opai Oeha'a started moving upstream or migrating. Very interesting, yeah.
Okay, we have a couple other questions that were typed into the Q&A box. The first is, which snails carry RLW?
Oh, red lungworm. I think we've been we've been fortunate for the different diseases. Maui's been sort of fortunate in not having many diseases, not just red lungworm, but also leptospirosis incidents and things. We've been kind of fortunate. So if I were say surveying a stream and I'll be going in every day, so sometimes what I'll do is I'll ask my doctor for doxycycline. I'll take that more as a precaution, just in case for leptospirosis and things. So just so people would understand, it's a bacteria, and so we take antibiotics to not get leptospirosis. Yeah, for the rat lungworm, I've also not seen anyone getting sick from, say, hihiwai as a snail, but we are concerned because we do see slugs inside the stream, and the slugs are carriers of rat lungworm, and so that's why always make sure you always wash your vegetables clean. It was kind of spooky. I saw some of the incidents where the slugs were inside like a kava. They had left the kava bowl out, and then they still drank it, and then they got left rat lungworm. That's the kind of things you kind of have to make sure and pay attention and be aware. Yeah.
Andrew asked, are the cane toads poisonous to other animals?
The cane toads, they could be, especially like for a lot of the dogs and things. So what they'll do is it's sort of their protection. And dogs used to also go after cane toads before. I grew up in Kaneohe, and Kaneohe used to have a lot of cane toads. This is back in the 60s. So we don't see anything near what the population used to be. Well, I think there's a lot more agriculture going on, so a lot more cane toads. So you'd see a lot more cane toad tadpoles in almost all the streams and things. So in the season, you just see cane toads everywhere. It's not like that now. Yeah, so it's a lot less than before.
Okay, Randy asked, can you speak to the impacts of non-native or introduced species on native species such as opai or oupu?
Opai and oopu. I think a lot of my work is that the opai and the oopu are migrating in the streams, but as for the impacts of diversions, because the streams have been diverted, we get less of a success in terms of migrating upstream. If streams were restored or flow is restored in the streams, then we see the numbers as well as the populations increase. And then if the animals get into the stream, the animals will migrate upstream. But it's the upper, well, in East Maui, if you know the upper diversions and things, I think those have been impacted. I think they'll always be impacted. Some of the upper diversions still divert water, so water doesn't flow continuously now. I'm surprised the opai. When you talk with the kupuna, they used to catch opai in the Taro, inside the lo'i, as well as they also used to raise oopu, nakea, inside the lo'i. I had one kupuna tell me that when they were small, they were allowed to run around in the taro patch. And by running around, it would stir up the water and everything. So when the water is all dirty, then what the oopu do is they come up to the surface and you can catch oopu with your hand. So that's what they told me. So very interesting. Also, taro patches used to be planted in islands. And so it used to be a lot deeper. So it's not like really shallow and then they're planting as much taro as you can inside the taro patch. But they'd have these ponds so they could grow the oopu. Nakea, grow them out. Yeah.
Andrew also asked, my impression is that cookie frogs are spreading via the irrigation canals. Is there a way to limit this?
Ooh, that's what I learned from the presentation yesterday. Yeah, I'm not paying attention to the cookie, but I do know it's in Maliko. And what's interesting with amphibians is they'd be restricted because of water. Because they've diverted the water, then the amphibians, and then I know that they're using the citric acid. I'm not sure, at least in terms, I know they're trying to control it. It's hard. I think a lot of introduced species, I think over time, in over 30 years, working with the different animals, it's sort of like when we have the introduced species, maybe sort of try to watch the populations. Maybe normally what's interesting is there'll be maybe if they establish maybe about 5 years before they kind of settle in. But prior to that, then they'll kind of, well, it's sort of like with crab spiders. You see them everywhere, and then they're abundant. And then later on, then the numbers aren't as bad as when they initially get established. Yeah.
Okay, and then the last question, Fern commented, I last saw armored catfish in the canal near Kanaha, thank you, on January 2020 for human eating. I guess she was wondering if you had any comments on that.
No, I like I said, I had seen them before. So I had, well, they were in the Safeway canals. So I know that they're not in the Safeway canal, but Kanaha Pond, they may still be there. So it looks like Fern is confirming for me that they're still there.
All right, and then one last question. Do you think any of the impacts invasive water species, do you know of any impacts invasive water species may have on soil health?
Oh, soil health. Well, we need people to be looking at soil. So it's kind of hard. We kind of like focus in, even like when I don't know soil health. Well, like I said, I would like to see a lot more of the streams flowing naturally, but it would help in some of the places if that were in Lo'i, and if they could get restored or water in the flood area by Lower Wailuku. It would be interesting if they could bring back Lo'i, and then when we have excess water, that the water go into the taro patches, and then the water will be used, but then the water will be also redirected back into the stream and the ocean. But it's just a way that water would be used better.
Okay, lots of mahalos coming in on the chat. And on behalf of HISC, thank you, Skippy, for presenting. I think everyone, including Elizabeth and I, enjoyed your time.